that Her Majesty has signified her royal assent to the following acts. Critical Benchmarks Reference Administrators Liability Act 2021, Rating Coronavirus Directors Disqualification Dissolved Companies Act 2021, Armed Forces Act 2021. We now come to questions, and we will start with questions. Secretary of State for Scotland from Bill Esterson.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with permission I will answer questions 1 and 2 together. I regularly discuss issues of importance to Scotland with ministers, including support for Scotland's renewable energy sector. Our recently published net zero strategy will leverage up to £90 billion of private investment by 2030 across the entire UK.
Bill Esterson.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Edinburgh-based Nova Innovation is a success story in the tidal energy sector. There are plans for tidal energy schemes across the UK, including in the Liverpool City region with the Mersey tidal barrage. Now, thanks in large part to the Labour Party and the industry, £20 million is now available within the contracts for different scheme after years where there was nothing. But I'm wondering whether the Minister will commit to the long-term support for the tidal energy industry, which has so much potential in Scotland, for my constituency Merseyside and across the UK.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to point to the contracts for difference, the fourth round of which was announced just at the beginning of this week. That is bigger than the other 3 rounds put together. Scotland has punched above our weight, securing 21% of the capacity in the previous rounds, and stands very well placed, not just in tidal, but right across the spectrum of different renewable energy. This is something we are funding in the short and the long term.
But the British government has not backed the Acorn carbon capture and storage cluster, which is vital to Scotland's path to net zero, but is maintaining support for the Cambo oil field, which would dig up more fossil fuels for years to come. Does the Minister not agree that the priority should always be on supporting renewable energy generation and not on fossil fuels?
Well, the honourable gentleman paints a misleading picture of the reality of the support we're giving. I've just said to his honourable friend the long-term support we are giving to the renewable sector. On Acorn, it's wrong to say that we are not backing it. There was a competitive round for 2 carbon capture and storage schemes. Acorn was a good project. It is a reserve project, and we continue to work with them to make sure that they have got a fighting chance of securing the next tranche of the carbon capture and storage schemes.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome the remarks made by my honourable friend just now with regards to Acorn in my constituency, which is still very much on the table despite protestations from the members opposite. But can my honourable friend confirm that this government also supports the oil and gas industry in its vital support through the North Sea transition deal of the energy transition by the oil and gas industry themselves?
Well, I'm absolutely able to give my honourable friend that assurance, and can also pay tribute to the tireless work he does to champion the energy sector, both as a minister and as a local member. He's absolutely right. Yes, we need to transition to renewable, but we have to be aware of the fact that we will need oil and gas during that transition period, not just for energy, but for all the other purposes that fossil fuels are required, such as the production of medicine.
We now come to, and can I welcome Liz Twist to a new post? Shadow Minister Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the post-COP26 message is that governments have little time to act on climate change. As the Secretary of State is aware, the Acorn Carbon Capture and Storage project hasn't been given the go-ahead by the UK Government, and it could create 15,000 highly skilled jobs in Scotland and demonstrate that a just transition is feasible. Now, my honourable friend, the Shadow Scotland Secretary, wrote to the First Minister to encourage her to find a joint solution. but the reply contained more reasons not to work together and grievances than finding a solution for the project. So, rather than the UK and Scottish Governments trading insults, can the Secretary of State back the Acorn project by finding a joint funding solution with the Scottish Government?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first of all welcome the Honourable Lady to her new position. I look forward to our debates in the weeks and months ahead. And I can probably advise her that she shouldn't be too surprised that letters from the Scottish Government will be full of grievances. That is par for the course. On Acorn, as I said, we do support the scheme. There was a competitive bidding round. It was placed third. But it is a reserve project, and we are working with them to make sure that they stand a good chance in the next tranche of the carbon capture and storage scheme.
Jacob, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alongside renewable energy, we need to accept our current energy mix alongside the energy transition. And so does he share my anger at the Scottish Government's complete dismissal of the Campbell oil field at the expense of oil and gas workers in Scotland, but across the country too?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and as I said a minute ago, we cannot just switch off oil and gas immediately. We do want to transition, and this government is investing significantly, 160 million in floating wind farms, 20 million for tidal stream, the 285 next round of contracts for difference. But it is important that we don't lose our domestic oil and gas supply for the whole range, not just energy, but the whole range of purposes, including medicine and other vital products.
Bonner.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We remain focused on delivering for Scotland within a strong United Kingdom. This can be seen by the scale of our investment, with more than £191 million of UK government funding being invested directly in community projects across Scotland. Mr. Speaker, this is real devolution in action.
Stephen Bonner.
People in Scotland have rejected the Tories for the last 50 years. We decisively rejected the Prime Minister's Brexit projects, and we rejected them once again at the last election. 65% of people in Scotland say he, the Prime Minister, is totally corrupt. 65% of people in Scotland also believe he should resign. Given that this coincides with a surge for independence, with now over half the population in Scotland supporting independence and the SNP, does the Secretary of State agree with me that the corruption of the UK government is driving Scots away from the Union? And if he himself was truly interested in saving the Union, shouldn't he be joining the rest of us in calling for his resignation?
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to stick to the question, which is what we are doing to deliver for the people of Scotland. And I'm delighted to answer that question. The Union Connectivity Review, I'll give you one example, the Union Connectivity Review, huge opportunities to improve transport links between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And I'm dismayed, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite refuse to support that.
Shadow Secretary of State, Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if you forgive me, can I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Ogmore, who's left the Shadow Scotland team and been significantly demoted, in my view, to the Ministry of Fun, but thank him for everything that he did in that role. And can I welcome my honourable friend, the member for Blaydon, who I don't know what she did in a previous life to deserve it, but she'll be, as you've already seen this morning, wonderful in her new role in the Shadow Scotland team, and we welcome her very much. Mr. Speaker, every day there are more and more revelations about the Prime Minister and this government breaking their own lockdown rules. It's truly one rule for them and one for the rest of us. As the country cancelled Christmas last year, the Prime Minister had a party or three. They have lost all moral authority to lead this country. Scandal, sleaze and cronyism writ large. Even the Scottish Conservative leader was asked 3 times on the media at the weekend if he could think of any positive attribute for the PM and couldn't answer. So can I ask the Secretary of State, can he think of any positive attribute for the Prime Minister and tell me any reason why this morally bankrupt Prime Minister isn't a bigger threat to the Union than any nationalist?
Well, absolutely, without any difficulty, I can. He's a man of optimism. He's a man of vision. He is a man who delivered the trade deal running up to Christmas last year, when no one said he could. He showed courage. He showed foresight in investing in the vaccine development, and he's gone on to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe.
I congratulate the Secretary of State for his reading ability, and I notice that the Secretary of State didn't use the word honesty. There's a surprise. I know the Secretary of State has cancelled his own Christmas party this year, so I look forward to seeing the photographs from it in the press shortly. A major strength of the Union, of course, Mr Speaker, is the pooling and sharing of resources. The First Minister has announced a raft of new COVID guidance this week that has devastated the hospitality trade. At the same time, she's offered pitiful financial support and criticised the UK Government for not providing funds. These sectors want our two governments to work together. They need our help. A hospitality business in my own constituency sent me an email last night, and I will quote from it. "My customers have been driven away, so we won't survive these latest restrictions without government support. We always need a good festive season to steer us through the winter months. Where is the financial support? So why can't the UK and Scottish governments work together to provide the financial support that these hospitality businesses deserve and need?"
Well, I mean, the honourable gentleman makes a very, very serious point, and hospitality is under a lot of pressure across the United Kingdom, not least in Scotland. The Treasury announced yesterday afternoon, just ahead of the First Minister's statement, that we were giving the Scottish Government certainty over their finances. That's the first point I'd make. What the Scottish Government have failed to do is to set out what measures they believe are right for Scotland and how much these would cost. And that's an important thing to understand. They've also failed to explain how they can't afford to act on their own, given they've had a record settlement this year of over £41 billion of block grant, the highest block grant settlement in real terms since devolution began.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Mary Black.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following on from the Shadow Minister, could I ask the Minister whether he was invited to any of these parties in Downing Street, or whether he had any knowledge of these parties?
Well, if the Honourable Lady had been at the Scottish Affairs Committee last Monday, where I was one of the witnesses, then she would know, or if she'd read the briefing from that, she would know that I was asked that question by the chairman, and I answered very clearly that A, I had no knowledge of the parties, and B, I wasn't at any of them.
Black.
I'm sorry for the floundering social life of the Minister, but if I could move on to the point that my honourable friend made, where when we talk about the Prime Minister's vision, is it not the case that that vision goes against what the majority of people in Scotland voted for? Given that they are against Brexit, the majority are against the Prime Minister, and they are against the Conservatives. So is it not the case that the best chance this Prime Minister has of saving the Union and rebuilding trust in our COVID response is by resigning?
So I'm going to allow the question to go, but we really need to scope it to where the questions are. It is party politics, and I don't want us to get into that, but it is Christmas, so I'm sure the Secretary of State might want to.
Well, you're right, Mr Speaker. I mean, I'd say again to the Honourable Lady that if we're talking about majorities, the First Minister failed to get a majority in May. And actually, let's be clear, less than a third of Scots voted for her in May. Our focus and the Prime Minister's focus is on fighting this pandemic and then recovery from this pandemic, bringing forward great things for Scotland, like the Union Connectivity Review, free ports, and investing directly with local authorities' structural funds.
Sir James Davies.
Number 4, Mr Speaker.
I have regular discussions with ministerial colleagues about cross-border connectivity. Sir Peter Henry's report published last month covers a wide range of solutions spanning all transport modes across the United Kingdom. We will take time to consider carefully all the recommendations in the report and publish our response in the new year.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Investing in zero-emission technologies is essential for future public transport connections. Scotland, as well as other parts of the country, of course, is an important manufacturing base for buses. Can my honourable friend confirm that the government's working hard to ensure that British manufacturing leads the way in fulfilling our world-leading commitments to introduce zero-emission buses?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm absolutely happy to give my honourable friend that assurance. We remain committed to supporting the introduction of 4,000 zero-emission buses and achieving a zero-emission bus fleet. I think I'm right in saying that transport now is the single contributor in this country to carbon emissions. So it's absolutely right that we back our domestic industry to help deliver these zero-emission buses.
Bring the shy member in, Jim Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister this question? Now that the bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland has been laid to bed at long last, can the Minister indicate what will be done to improve the roads from Larne to Stranraer and further on? Because it's very important for us in Northern Ireland where we have tourism, we have business, so the roads need to be up to a certain standard. What has been done to improve those? Thank you.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a very important question, and the thinking behind the connectivity review is that we look at these transport connections right across the UK, and the road, the A75 from Stranraer and Cairnryan to the motorway network is in desperate need of an upgrade, and that was one of the central recommendations of Sir Peter's report. So absolutely we see this as an important corridor.
Andrew Jones.
Question 5, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, my ministerial colleagues and I regularly discuss oil and gas with fellow government ministers and stakeholders. The oil and gas industry is hugely important to the North East of Scotland, and most recently, Minister Offord attended the North Sea Transition Forum alongside Minister Hands, regulators and representatives from the oil and gas industry.
Andrew Jones.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for that answer? In the transition period to our net zero future, we will still need oil and gas for domestic use. So what role does my honourable friend see for UK domestic production to meet that need? Because the Scottish economy is well poised to deliver it.
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We will continue to need oil and gas as we transition to net zero. Developing our own supplies reduces reliance on imports that are produced to less rigorous environmental standards. It will also protect jobs in our oil and gas sector during our transition. And I would say, Mr Speaker, comments by the Scottish Government on this have been, by turns, disgraceful and depressing. As Sir Ian Wood, one of the most respected authorities in the industry, said, those Scottish Government ministers are creating, and I quote, an adverse investment environment. To which I would only add, Mr Speaker, careless talk costs livelihoods.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Minister aware of the evidence given to the Scottish Parliament's Net Zero Committee by Professor Stuart Hazeldine, who said there was no advantage to the Acorn project having been given reserve bidder status, and that it merely means a lot of the meetings and requires them to run on the spot with very little or no funding? Is the Professor wrong in his assessment, and if so, would he be good enough to tell us why?
We want Acorn to be expedited in the next wave. It's the reserve for this round, and we would like it to be expedited in the next wave. We've met with many of the stakeholders involved in the project, and they've agreed with us that if we can accelerate it to 2023, they can improve the bid, and the government can include it in the next wave, and that's very much our focus.
Andrew Bowie.
My right honourable friend agree with me that the complete abandonment of North East oil and gas workers by the First Minister of Scotland is an absolute disgrace. And it wasn't just Cambo that she called for an end for, it was all further exploration in the North Sea, period. Can he confirm that this government stands full square behind the industry and the workers in the North East, unlike the Scottish Government?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'd also add that her minister, the Green MSP, saying that it was only hard-right extremists who wanted to explore oil was another disgraceful remark. It's absolutely the case that even when we get to 2050, we will need oil for 20% of our power, we will need gas for 15% of our power and for producing blue hydrogen, and we will need that oil not just for power but also for important things like the petrochemicals industry, for making instruments for the NHS. It is ridiculous to think that we can just turn off the taps and not destroy our economy.
Speaker, it's not just about what we extract from the North Sea, it's also about what we put back in to the North Sea. And that's where the Acorn project is fundamentally important. Now, the Secretary of State mentioned Sir Ian Wood and his views in relation to the oil and gas sector. He'll also be cognisant of Sir Ian Wood's views in relation to his government's decision to turn its back on Acorn. Does the Secretary of State, will he finally admit to regretting the decision of his colleagues?
Well, I've discussed this with Sir Ian Wood, and I don't think you reflect fairly his views. But he understands and agrees with us that the bid can be improved. At the moment, the Acorn bid, just to be clear, the difference between Acorn and Humberside and Teesside and Merseyside was that Humberside and Teesside and Merseyside have a huge hinterland of industrial carbon. Acorn was bringing the carbon from all parts of the UK and from Europe to make the bid work. And what we're doing is we're working on how to get more industrial carbon into that project to make it more viable and to expedite it for 2023.
Scott Benton.
6, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 6 and 13 together. My office and I have regular discussions with the Ministry of Defence on all matters relating to defence in Scotland, including on the latest plans to modernise and restructure the Army. I was pleased that the review included plans for the Army to expand its footprint in Scotland, and it's going from 6 to 7 units, and Scotland will have a greater proportion of the Army than today. And while I have the opportunity, I'd also like to thank our fantastic British Armed Forces who are currently supporting the booster programme in Scotland. The Secretary of State for Defence announced yesterday a further 100 military personnel will support the vital booster campaign. And today the MOD have announced today another 80 medics going to 3 NHS boards in Scotland. This means that over 400 military personnel are supporting Scotland's health services.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that Future Soldier shows just how important defence is to Scotland and Scotland is to the defence of the UK and our allies? And does he share my enthusiasm that this paper delivers £355 million worth of investment into the Army estate in Scotland?
Secretary of State.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Scotland plays a vital role in the defence of the UK. The Army's Future Soldier restructuring programme is great news for Scotland. Not only will it deliver £355 million of investment in the Army's Scottish estate, as my honourable friend pointed out, but Scotland will gain a major unit and we'll see a greater proportion, as I said earlier, of the British Army in Scotland.
Speaker, soldiers from Scotland have had a central role in the armed forces over many centuries, from the charge of the Scots Greys at Waterloo to the Western Front to helping roll out our vaccine programme. So can my right honourable friend assure me that that proud central role following any restructuring will continue in Scotland as strong as ever?
Under the Future Soldier Review, the Army's footprint in Scotland will be stronger than ever, recognising the immense contribution that Scottish servicemen and women make to the British Army. I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that Scottish troops will continue the tradition and they will lead the new Ranger Regiment, deploying alongside partner forces to counter extremist organisations and hostile state threats.
Chris Elmore.
Number 7, sir.
Seven, it's me again. Hard of hearing, Mr. Speaker. The budget and the spending review provides the largest annual block grant to the devolved administration in Scotland since the Scotland Act in 1998. Throughout the pandemic, we've provided significant support, including through our furlough and self-employed schemes and additional support to businesses. This has been on top of an extra £14.5 billion for the Scottish Government. We're also investing in new local infrastructure and regeneration projects through the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Ownership Fund, alongside the existing £1.5 billion investment into the Scottish City Growth Deals.
We got there in the end, Mr. Speaker. The Scottish budget last week should have been marked with the start of an ambitious recovery plan for Scotland, but instead it's a missed opportunity which won't deliver the recovery Scotland needs. Similarly, the UK government's budget offered tax cuts for bankers on business-class flights, but nowhere near enough for hard-working families across Scotland and the rest of the UK. Does the Secretary of State accept that both the Scottish and UK governments must go further so we can get an economy firing all cylinders?
Well, I accept that both governments need to work together. I think the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right on that. But I would say that, I think the UK government is doing its bit with a block grant of £41.3 billion, £4.6 billion higher than last year, the highest ever since devolution began, with £14.5 billion of COVID funding since the pandemic began, a furlough scheme supporting over 900,000 jobs in Scotland, grants and loans to businesses totalling over £4 billion. I think the UK government is doing exactly what it needs to do to support the Scottish economy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm delighted that the Government recently announced a new £20 million ring-fenced allocation for tidal stream technology as part of a new Contracts for Difference round. This will enable Scotland to take advantage of the huge potential that exists to develop tidal stream technology.
The First Select Committee visited Orkney a few months ago when collating evidence for its report on renewable energy. We were so impressed with the tidal stream technology, which is less expensive than tidal lagoon barrage technology, and delighted that renewable energy auction will include for the first time a ring fence for tidal stream power. How will this turbocharge the potential for this type of renewable energy in Scotland?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very glad that my honourable friend and our colleagues in the committee had the opportunity to visit Orkney. I also visited Orkney in August and was hugely impressed by the innovation that is going on there. The principle behind Contracts for Difference is that it gives the renewable sector the confidence to invest in these long-term technologies. And I believe Scotland as a whole, and Orkney in particular, will be at the forefront of this.
That's the end of questions. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now start with questions to Prime Minister. Nick Smith.
Number one, please, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in wishing you, all members of staff, a Merry Christmas and indeed to all members, and a Happy New Year. And members from across the House will also want to join me in sending our warmest wishes to all our armed forces and all members of the emergency services, health and care workers, and especially those who will be working over Christmas, and not least those in our national mission to get boosted now. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, can I congratulate the Prime Minister and his wife on the birth of his baby daughter? Last week was Crime Week. Was it a success for you, Prime Minister?
Yes. I'm very grateful and I thank him for his kind words. And yes, it was, Mr Speaker, because last week we showed that we are not only the party that is putting in the resources to fight crime, with 10,000 more police already recruited, but we are the party that is finally getting tough on the drugs gangs that blight the lives of children and communities up and down this country, and we won't tolerate middle-class drugs use any more than any other kind of drugs use, Mr Speaker.
Wishing the Prime Minister and his family a happy Christmas. Mr Speaker, last Christmas I joined the charity Seva Day in wrapping Christmas presents at Durga Bhawan Temple. I delivered a small number of the thousands of gifts the Hindu community had donated for children and adults across Sandwell. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking Seva Day, Deepak, Mandu and Reena, who I'll be joining again this Friday at West Bromwich Sri Krishna Mandir?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for raising the work of Seva Day and for all the people of West Bromwich, Hindu community, who do make an incredible contribution to this country. And I'm delighted that the charity is again distributing donated gifts. Thank you to everyone involved, and particularly to my honourable friend for her efforts.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I also wish you, everybody who works in this House and all members, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And can I also send my congratulations to the Prime Minister and his wife on the birth of their daughter, and join the Prime Minister in supporting our armed forces and all those on the front line. Mr Speaker, there were 200,000 Omicron infections on Monday. That's doubling every 2 or 3 days, and the NHS could be overwhelmed. So I want to start by encouraging everyone listening to this session to get their jabs and boosters. It's the best way to protect themselves, the NHS and their loved ones. given the seriousness of the situation, does the Prime Minister agree that the 100 Conservative members who voted against Plan B measures last night voted against steps which are necessary to protect the NHS and to protect lives?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is taking a balanced and a proportionate approach to dealing with the pandemic, and the House voted through Plan B, I think, with Conservative votes, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue with the massive booster rollout, to which he is a late convert. Since Friday, when I decided that we had to accelerate the booster programme in view of the data about Omicron, we've cut the timetable in half. Mr. Speaker, Monday was the biggest vaccination Monday in the history of this country, and yesterday was the second biggest vaccination achievement by the NHS ever. More than 500,000 jabs delivered, and the campaign continues to grow. I want to thank absolutely everybody involved. I want to thank all the British public for coming forward to get boosted now.
Mr. Speaker, we all hope that, combined with the booster programme, Plan B will be sufficient to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed. Nobody wants to see further restrictions, but the Prime Minister has quite rightly not ruled anything out. So can I take this opportunity to make clear to the Prime Minister that if further votes are needed to save lives and protect the NHS, Labour MPs will follow my leadership and we will always put the national interest first. Can I ask the Prime Minister to get his house in order so he can say the same about the members behind him?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, if further measures are needed, as the House will understand, if further regulation is needed, of course this House will have a further say. As for following his leadership, Mr. Speaker, they wibbled-wobbled over Plan B, they wibble-wobbled over quarantine, and if we listened to him, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't even have the vaccine rollout, because we would have remained in the European Medicines Agency. It's true, and we wouldn't have opened up on July the 19th, Mr. Speaker. We would have remained in lockdown. That's the reality, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, let me put that straight back in its box. The Labour Party showed the leadership yesterday that the Prime Minister lacked. Mr. Speaker, if it wasn't for Labour votes, his government wouldn't have been able to introduce vital health measures we need to save lives and protect the NHS. So weak is his leadership. His own MPs were wrong to vote against basic public health measures, but I can understand why they're angry with him. After all, the Health Secretary said this summer that relaxations of restrictions were irreversible. They weren't. Only last week the government...
Order. I've been tempted by both of you a little bit too much. I think it's Christmas. That's the only reason you're going to remain. Prime Minister. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, only last week the government was saying Plan B measures were not required. They are. Just like the rail revolution for the North. No one will have to sell their homes for social care, just like no tax rises. It's overpromise after overpromise until reality catches up. Does the Prime Minister understand why his own MPs no longer trust him?
Mr. Speaker, there he goes again. He comes to this House pompously claiming that he wants to rise above party politics and support the efforts of the nation in delivering the vaccine rollout, and then he talks endlessly about party politics and plays political games. I think what the people of this country can see is as a result of what this government has done, with the decisions we've taken, the tough decisions that we've taken to deliver which he ducked, Mr. Speaker, to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe and now the fastest booster rollout. We now have, Mr. Speaker, the fastest growing economy in the G7, and more jobs today, 500,000 more jobs today than there were when the pandemic began. That is Conservative government in action, Mr. Speaker. We deliver, they complain.
Mr. Speaker, the only person undermining public confidence is sitting right there. Here's the problem. His MPs are wrong to vote against basic public health measures, but they are not wrong to distrust him. Last week, the Conservative member for the Forest of Dean asked, why should people at home listening to the Prime Minister do things that people working in Downing Street are not prepared to do? Tory MP. The Conservative member for Shipley last week asked the Prime Minister, can he give me any reason at all why I shouldn't tell my constituents to treat these rules the same way that Downing Street treated these rules last year? Now, the Prime Minister's had a week to come up with a good answer. Has he done so?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is very, very clear, and it's there in what the public are doing, Mr. Speaker, because they can see that the government is getting on with delivering on their priorities, not just on the economy, Mr. Speaker, but above all on delivering the fastest booster rollout in Europe. And he's fond of these European comparisons, Mr. Speaker, but we've done almost double the percentage of any other European country. We've boosted 86% of the over-80s in this country, 91% of those aged 75 to 79. That is an astonishing achievement, and I think that is what the people of this country are focused on, Mr. Speaker. And rather than the partisan trivia that he continually raises, when frankly he has a case to answer himself.
I think that's no, he hasn't come up with a good answer. For weeks now, he claims that no rules were broken. He claims he didn't know what was happening in his own house last Christmas. I don't believe him. His MPs don't believe him, and nor do the British public. He's taking the public for fools, and it's becoming dangerous, because from today, anyone who tests positive for coronavirus faces a second Christmas in isolation. It will be heartbreaking for families across the country. The message from the government has to be, we know that following the rules won't be easy this Christmas, but it is necessary. Can the Prime Minister not see that he has no hope of regaining the moral authority to deliver that difficult message if he cannot be straight with the British public about the rule breaking in Downing Street last Christmas?
Mr. Speaker, I've repeatedly answered that question before, and as he knows, a report is being delivered to me by the Cabinet Secretary into exactly what went on. He might explain why there are pictures of him quaffing beer, Mr. Speaker. In a way, I mean, we haven't. I think what the British public want us all to do, frankly, and what they want us all to do is focus on the matter in hand and continue to deliver the vaccine rollout in the way that we are. And I think it is an absolutely fantastic thing that people are now coming forward in the way that we are, the way that they are. 45% of people over 18 have now had a vaccine, Mr. Speaker, and I thank our amazing staff. I thank the NHS. I thank all the GPs. I thank the GPs. And we are. Well, you blocked the investment in there. Mr. Speaker, they wouldn't vote for it. They wouldn't vote for investment in our NHS, Mr. Speaker. They wouldn't do it. I thank them for what they're doing. I can tell the House that we're now speeding things up by allowing people to avoid the 15-minute delay after they've been vaccinated, which I hope will encourage even more people to come forward.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the virus is spreading once again, and lives and livelihoods are at risk. The British public are looking for a Prime Minister with the trust and the authority to lead Britain through the crisis. Instead, we're burdened with the worst possible Prime Minister at the worst possible time. They're shouting now. Where were they in the lobby last night? His own MPs have had enough. They won't defend him. They won't turn up to support him. And if he proposes them, they won't vote for basic public health measures. So at this time of national effort, the Labour Party stood up, shown the leadership that the Prime Minister can't, and put the health and security of the British people first.
On. This is silly because I can't hear the question. I will hear the question. I don't think we need any more help from this front bench. I'm just dealing with this corner first before I come back. Can I just say, I understand it's the last PMQs and we're going to be coming back in the new year, but I do need to hear the question. And it may take a long time, but I will hear it. So please, I want to get through questions. I want you all to get away for Christmas. At this stage, you won't. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is so weak that without Labour votes last night, vital public health measures wouldn't have got through. But this country can't... Says it's not true. Oh, God. I haven't got... It's not true. He's so socially distant from the truth. He thinks that that's not true. I don't know where to start. We better press on. We can't go on with a Prime Minister who's too weak to lead. So will the Prime Minister take time this Christmas to look in the mirror and ask himself whether he has the trust and authority to lead this country?
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We won that vote last night with Conservative votes, as I told the House. I respect the feelings and I respect the anxieties that colleagues have about. Of course I do. I respect and understand the anxieties, the legitimate anxieties that colleagues have about restrictions on their liberty. But I believe, and on the liberty of people. But I believe that the approach that we're taking is balanced and proportionate and right for this country. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, let me tell the House about he talks about leadership, some of the decisions, the tough decisions that I've had to take. I had to decide to stay out of the European ventilator scheme, so we had our own ventilator challenge, which he then ridiculously attacked. I decided to go ahead of the rest of Europe, with the vaccine rollout, Mr. Speaker, which would have been impossible if we'd listened to him. I decided to go ahead with opening up our society and our economy on July the 19th, which he opposed, Mr. Speaker, which he opposed. And frankly, if we'd listened to him, never forget, we would not now have the fastest economic growth of the G7. It's because we took those courageous steps, Mr. Speaker, that we now have 500,000 more people in work now than there were when the pandemic began. And yesterday I saw 1.2 million job vacancies, Mr. Speaker. That is what Conservative governments do. They create employment. They create business opportunities. And above all, Mr. Speaker, we vaccinate, they vacillate. They jabber, we jab. They play party politics, Mr. Speaker, and we get on with the job.
I'm amazed. I'm absolutely amazed that some of you wanted to catch my eye. Obviously you don't. Thanks for that. It's making my life easier. So don't be shocked when I wasn't going to put you in for that special question today. Let's come to the man of the moment, Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we look forward to 2022, one of the dates that stands out for me is the 21st of March, which will be International Down Syndrome Day. Yeah. In thanking the government for the support and indeed thanking all parties in the House for the support for the Down Syndrome Bill, can I ask the Prime Minister if he will give his personal commitment to ensure that we get that bill on the statute book before International Down Syndrome Day, when we will be the first country in the world to do so? We talk about global Britain. It can't just be about trade and diplomacy. It must also be about values. Wouldn't that be a great place for Britain to start?
My right honourable friend is a wonderful campaigner on this issue. He's completely right about Down syndrome people. They can have poorer health outcomes. This bill, I know, does aim to improve life outcomes for people with Down syndrome, and we are pleased to support it, and we will do whatever we can to ensure the prompt progress of this bill.
We now come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I wish you...
It's not a pantomime. Oh, yeah, exactly. Carry on partying.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I wish you, all your staff, all members in the House, a Merry Christmas and a good New Year when it comes, and send my thanks to those in the front line, our emergency service, our armed forces, for everything that they have done to get us through this year. Mr. Speaker, the public understands the threat that Omicron poses to all our people and to our NHS. But we saw from last night's vote the Tories might be privileged enough to live in denial about this danger, but the rest of us have the responsibility to live in the real world. That means increasing public health measures and increasing financial support for businesses and workers. The Scottish Government is delivering £100 million from our fixed budget to support businesses. But we all know that more is needed. Yesterday, the UK Government put out a press release saying that new financial support was coming. But last night, the Treasury U-turned saying no new money was available. So, Prime Minister, which is it? Is there any new money to support businesses, or was it all just smoke and mirrors once again?
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and I share some of the points that he made about the importance of being vigilant about Omicron. I think it's good that he set that out. I think it's important that we continue to work with the Scottish administration as we do to help everybody through it. There is more money, as he knows, through Barnett consequentials. There are also further powers under the existing devolutionary settlement for the Scottish administration to raise money if it chooses to, and they have that option. But we will of course continue with the discussions with the Scottish administration.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, that simply wasn't an answer, and it really just does confirm it's all smoke and mirrors. There was no new money for Scotland. Once again, the Prime Minister can't trust a word that this Prime Minister says. Dodgy dealings on renovations and his distant relationship with the truth. All of it has left him weak. Last night, this UK Government struggled to get measures through this House that Scotland has had for months. A Prime Minister who can't do what is needed to protect the public is no Prime Minister at all. Mr. Speaker, nobody wants further restrictions, but Scotland can't afford to be hamstrung if the Prime Minister can't act because he's got 99 problems behind him. So will he give the devolved governments the powers and financial support that we need to protect our people?
Mr. Speaker, I think we're going to need a bit bigger waistcoat to contain the synthetic indignation of the right honourable gentleman, quite frankly. If I can just tell him that there are the powers, the Scottish administration has the powers, but what we've also done, Mr. Speaker, is a record settlement, for Scotland, £41 billion. But I, in all friendship with the right honourable gentleman, who I'm actually quite cordial with behind the scenes, Mr. Speaker, we will work with the Scottish Government to make sure that we get through this thing together.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stroke is the leading cause of adult disability in the United Kingdom. It's the fourth largest killer. We've made much progress, but regrettably, in the last couple of years, key treatments like thrombectomy, thrombolysis and timely interventions in hospital have actually stalled and gone backwards. In particular, most stroke survivors do not receive less than half the recommended levels of rehabilitation, something which the Prime Minister knows my own family have experienced. Can we urgently look to upgrade the very good National Stroke Plan into a fully fledged national strategy for stroke, with a minister responsible for it and a dedicated team of officials in the department to roll that out, please?
I want to thank my right honourable friend for that question. I know he and I have discussed before his own personal reasons for caring so much about this issue, and I understand and I sympathise deeply with what he's saying. And that's why one of the reasons why I want to make sure that we do invest enough in this. There are 20 integrated stroke networks in England already. What we want to do is increase their capacity by about tenfold. Mr. Speaker, very happy to make sure that he has the right meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the matter. But that's why it's so important that we invest now in our NHS in the way that we are. And what a pity that essential measure could not be supported by the party opposite.
The Minister.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's actions over the last number of months have absolutely eroded public confidence at the worst possible time in a public health crisis, excusing rule-breaking by his own MPs, ignoring rule-breaking in his own House. He can't even lead Tory MPs to vote for his public health guidance. How does he expect to lead anybody else? Surely now it is time, Mr. Speaker, for him to do the right thing, the only thing left to him to restore public confidence, and resign.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to get on with protecting the public of this country and making sure that we get through this pandemic together as one united kingdom, Mr. Speaker, and making sure that we protect trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the way that I know he would want it protected.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In East Anglia, there are on the one hand tremendous opportunities in such sectors as low-carbon energy and sustainable fishing, and yet on the other hand, significant challenges with deep pockets of deprivation, particularly in coastal communities. I acknowledge the investment that has been made, but there is a concern locally that the government has yet to comprehend the scale of the opportunity that our region has to be a global exemplar in new and revitalised industries, and in doing so bring transformative and long-term benefits to local people. Will my right honourable friend meet with other East Anglian MPs and myself so that together we can put in place a strategy to realise the full potential of the East of England?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but I also want to say that I understand completely the massive opportunity that exists in and the potential that exists in those coastal communities, and that is why we're investing £120 million already in 5 new town deals, including for Lowestoft, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will want to be taking his points on board as we bring forward the Levelling Up white paper in the new year.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister believe that it is the damage being caused by Brexit, his litany of broken promises, his condoning of Conservative Party corruption, or just simply his complicity in lockdown, busting, Christmas parties and quizzes, which has caused the public to so dramatically, so rapidly lose faith in his leadership?
Mr. Speaker, what I observe is that actually it was our freedom from the rules of the European Union that enabled us to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, that has enabled us to have the fastest economic growth in the G7, and that is of massive benefit to each and every one of his constituents, and I think he should acknowledge that point.
Laura Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the significant achievements of this government is the work it's done with local authorities to tackle rough sleeping. 5 years ago, 36 people were sleeping rough in the Newbury area. This Christmas, West Berkshire Council have reduced that to 0. But they can only sustain that success with the help of additional support services to tackle the complex causes of homelessness. What action will the government take through its new 10-year drug strategy to intercept the link between addiction and life on the streets?
Yes. My honourable friend is completely right to draw the link between drug addiction and rough sleeping, and that's why our drug strategy is so absolutely vital for tackling this problem. I also want to thank local councils, Mr. Speaker, and everybody involved in the Everyone In campaign. I think that homelessness and rough sleeping are a blight and a disgrace, a shame for our society, and I'm proud to say that levels are falling. Our rough sleeping snapshot shows levels have fallen 43% since 2017, though clearly as we come out of the pandemic in the next year or so, we must make sure that we continue to reduce rough sleeping. It remains an absolute priority for this government.
Ben Lay.
Mr. Speaker, with the emergence of the Omicron variant and a rising number of COVID infections, more and more people are being asked to self-isolate or to stay at home to look after isolating children. I've been contacted by people in Ceredigion who have been excluded from isolation support payments as they are not in receipt of benefits or above the weekly earnings threshold. Will the Prime Minister act urgently to increase statutory sick pay, which currently stands at a mere £96.35 a week, so that people in this position do not have to choose between following public health regulations or putting food on the table?
I thank him very much, and I understand the difficulties some families will find themselves in. We want to look after everybody throughout the pandemic, and that's why we've done things like lift the living wage in the way we have, increased the funds available for childcare, but also made sure that the councils have an extra hardship fund of £500 million to help families of the kind that he's describing through this winter.
Keir Mellon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following confirmation of the Crewe to Manchester leg of HS2, the Alstom factory and Crewe winning a HS2 rolling stock contract, and Crewe's long history at the heart of our railway industry, does the Prime Minister agree with me that Crewe is a strong contender for the headquarters of Great British Railways, and can he tell me when the process to choose the location of the new HQ will start?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think my brief says here I can be very careful in what I say. I've no doubt that Crewe is a strong contender, but further details of the competition will be announced in the coming weeks, Mr. Speaker, and I know that expressions of interest from places such as Crewe will be very welcome.
You've got a couple in them. Maria Riegel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After inquest verdicts on the 97 people who died in the Hillsborough disaster of unlawful killing, the right honourable gentleman stood for election to this House on a manifesto that included legislating to introduce a public advocate. Why then is his government repeatedly blocking my public advocate bill, which has cross-party support and would prevent families bereaved by public disasters from ever again having to endure what the Hillsborough families have had to cope with over the last 32 years? Is it an oversight or yet another broken promise?
I thank the right honourable lady, and no, we do recognise the importance of putting the bereaved and the bereaved of Hillsborough at the heart of an investigation, and we think that in certain circumstances funding may be available for a representation for the bereaved at a public inquiry or interest. We are considering, to her point, we are considering what steps should be taken. I will ensure that she has a meeting with the relevant minister in the relevant department, in the Home Office, as soon as possible.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, as we see Russian forces massing on the Ukrainian border, can we be reminded that Russia is also continuing cyber attacks, attempted assassinations, using gas as a political weapon, holding illegally territory in the Crimea, in Georgia, intimidating the West and interfering in Western elections? How much does the government understand that President Putin is conducting a hybrid war against the West, and how is the government responding to it?
Excellent question. I thank my right honourable friend, and I'm afraid he is absolutely right in what he says, and he's also right to stress the particular urgency of the situation in. He's right in what he says about hybrid warfare and all the other interventions, but there is a particular crisis that we face on the border with Ukraine, where Russian troops have been massing for some time, as the House knows, and I told President Putin on Monday what I think everybody in the G7 and more widely is agreed, that if Russia were so rash, so mad as to engage in an invasion of sovereign territory of Ukraine, then there would be an extremely tough package of economic sanctions mounted by our allies, mounted by the UK and our friends around the world. There would also, of course, be support for Ukraine. There would inevitably be the build-up of NATO forces in the periphery regions, and as I told President Putin, I believe any such action would be catastrophic, not just for Russia and for Ukraine, but for the world, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister made an address to the nation on Sunday on COVID booster jabs, and he said every eligible adult will have the chance to get the booster before the new year, roughly 2 weeks away. However, the Health Secretary and our national health leaders have said otherwise. We know that those who deliver our health service were not adequately consulted. The infrastructure to deliver was not prepared. Isn't this going to be yet another broken promise, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, yes, this is a massive national effort. Yes, it will be incredibly hard to achieve. But do I believe that our NHS, our GPs, our volunteers can do it? Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's the spirit in which she and the whole House should approach it. And rather than taking that approach, Mr. Speaker, can I advise all the Labour benches and all colleagues around this House to tell our constituents to get boosted now.
Tom Tugendar.
Speaker, I very much welcome my right honourable friend's answer to a question just a moment ago and his emphasis on global Britain and partnership in standing up to autocracies. Will he therefore share the concern that I have about the reports I've just got from the Foreign Office that there is a staff cut of 10% across the board? How is this compatible with global Britain?
Mr. Speaker, we are investing massively in overseas aid. We're investing massively, £10 billion a year in overseas aid. This country is spending, I think, we are the biggest spender in Europe. Overseas, 54 billion. If you look at what we're doing on aid, on the Foreign Office, on defence, we are the biggest spender on overseas activities of any country in Europe. And I know he's an expert on foreign affairs, Mr. Speaker, but I can tell him that the recent information that has trickled into his ears is, I'm assured by my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, fake news.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Transport for London faces serious financial difficulties solely due to the pandemic causing the collapse in fares income. The emergency COVID funding to TfL expires the day after tomorrow. Prior to the pandemic, the Mayor of London spent 4 years improving TfL's finances
There will be a nightmare. There will be a nightmare in a moment. Can I just say, we want to get through the questions. I was hoping to get some extra people in. You're not helping me do so. Come on in, Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prior to the pandemic, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, spent 4 years improving TfL's finances after his predecessor inexplicably bargained away TfL's £700 million annual government grant. By failing to meet the Mayor on extending the emergency COVID grant, this government is putting the city's economy and environment at risk. Rail companies have had additional support. Will the PM instruct silent chaps to meet the Mayor immediately so that buses and tubes can continue to keep London moving from Friday?
Mr. Speaker, this happens to be one of the subjects I probably know more about than anybody else in this House. I can tell her that when I was Mayor and I was Chairman of Transport for London, we had our finances in balance because I ran a responsible fares policy. When I left the mayoralty, we had Crossrail in surplus and we had our reserves in surplus. What happened actually was that the Labour Mayor of London embarked on a reckless, unfunded fares policy. A reckless, unfunded fares policy that cutting fares recklessly so as to leave a huge black hole in Transport for London's finances. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we have the greatest capitals. I'm not going to dissent. And we will, of course, help the stricken Labour difficulties in any way that we can, but blame lies fairly and squarely with City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to wish all of our constituents all across the country a Merry Christmas and a safe 2022. What matters to my Sedgefield constituents, though, is jobs, jobs, jobs. Would the PM join me in congratulating Hitachi and Alstom in securing the HS2 rolling stock contract, which is a tremendous vote of confidence in the people of Newton Aycliffe and Sedgefield. And could I ask him to encourage the Secretary of State for Transport to confirm that the feasibility study for Furry Hill Station approved his earliest convenience, so we can get on with levelling up, building back better for Furry Hill, Bishop Midland, Sedgefield and the Cornford.
Yes, I thank my honourable friend, who is a great advocate for Sedgefield and for his constituents and for levelling up. I congratulate Hitachi and Alstom on securing the HS2 stock order, and the proponents of the Ferry Hill Station for completing the initial business case for the scheme. And Mr. Speaker, this is part of the £96 billion investment that we're making in our railway infrastructure, the biggest in 100 years, dwarfing anything that the Labour Party has ever embarked on, and we will get on with uniting and levelling up across our country.
Caroline Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister would like to thank me for assisting him, as he was unaware of last year's and been kept in the dark about last year's festivities, with my assistance in lighting the Christmas tree in Downing Street this year. Unlike the Prime Minister, I am not in the dark as to what my staff are doing this year. We are serving and delivering over 1,000 hampers and gifts to families across Swansea East to make sure they get across Swansea, that they get a Christmas. Will the Prime Minister please join me in congratulating and thanking everyone involved, and everyone deserves a Christmas. And if he would like to come and light a tree in my constituency, I'll ensure there's one available for him.
Can I say it's one of the nicest things somebody said to me from the benches opposite for a long time, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank and congratulate everybody in her constituency who's helping to bring hampers to those who need it this Christmas. It's a wonderful thing.
More.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, are with those who loved Star Hobson, who was brutally murdered by a monster whilst Star's evil mother allowed this to happen in Keighley. The court heard that numerous referrals were made to Bradford Council's Children's Services months in advance of Star's murder, but they were not taken seriously. In fact, the case was closed. The Prime Minister will be aware that this is the latest of a long list of failings at Bradford Council's Children's Services, where political correctness appears to have been put before the welfare of children. I have no confidence in Bradford Council's leadership to deliver children's services. And since the death of Star, I am pleased that the government has sent in a commissioner to oversee.
Sorry, I'm very bothered with going into sub judice. It is very, very serious, and I don't want to cause a real problem. I would say for the Prime Minister, if he could answer without getting any further details. I think we've gone a little bit too far into what the case is at the moment. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for your direction. I would just want to say that I think the whole House will once again be filled with incredulity at the cruelty of people who could perpetrate a child killing like this, but also sadness and bewilderment that it could not have been prevented. And we will appoint, as my honourable friend knows, appoint a commissioner to assess the relevant council, Bradford's capability and capacity to improve on their findings, and they will report on their handling. They will report in January. But this will also feed in to the report that we've commissioned on the death of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. And I say to those who are responsible in the authorities concerned that we will not hesitate to remove service control if that is what is necessary to drive the improvements that we need to see.
That comes to the end. We're going to go to you, Hughes. Can I just wish everybody a wonderful Christmas, and let's have a peaceful New Year to everybody. Thank you. Yeah. Let everybody go. All the best. Good to see you. Look after yourselves, folks. Cheers. All the best.